what's the national security concern of, and why are we executing these executive orders? Aside from the fact that they are headquartered and or have parents of the subsidiary or headquartered in China, there seems to be a concern over data access and access to hundreds of millions of people's personal information, habits, geolocation data. And there's a concern that you might have the ability to monitor, track, or collect more data and inform more things. There's a secondary concern that I don't think has been articulated well. However, I did hear one of our Department of Justice colleagues yesterday talk about it, is that there's also a concern that these apps could be used for content control and or censorship, and that there's overall a fear of reach that goes wide and deep of Chinese government into the United States core infrastructure and personal data sets. And so those are the kind of the key areas within this. When I think about this though, and it's highly specific to China, that we really should be having a much more transparent conversation, that not just about the US and China, but about the applications broadly and how they use data, what is collected and why, where is the data processed, how is the data stored and where is it stored, how is it protected, what are the data transfer policies, how long is the data retained and why, when is the data retired, and maybe most important, who owns the data.
But is this the right policy then?
So I think I would like to get Melissa's comments on the security side of this in particular. On the economic side, this is where TPP could have been incredibly helpful. A group of 10, 12, 14 democracies, liberal democracies, that are basically saying these are the rules. So Melissa brought up the whole point of data, who owns data. Setting standards among that group would absolutely force China to make a very fundamental decision, which is, are we part of the world standards in terms of how we deal with this, or are we not? And I think that by trying to do it just between the US and China, it looks much more like a one-on-one competition, which I think is a terrible mistake in terms of how we should be addressing China and these kind of policy issues. You have to make the problem bigger. And by making the problem, this is what we should do for the global good. The whole idea of data ownership, data management, data distribution, if you could create a forum where that became the fundamental discussion, I think that would be, then the reciprocity issue wouldn't be, well, do you want to play in the US? It's like, do you want to be part of this group? Do you want to be part of this standard? That would be, to me, a much more palatable conversation.
I think it really needs to, the conversation, it needs to be about the data, not about the app or the company. Because that's what it's really coming down to. It's about the data flows, it's about the access to that information and what you can do with it. And so this is the beginning of the algorithmic warfare in many ways, I could say, you know, and the beginning and maybe a wedge into artificial intelligence, and where the next set of companies are going to be maybe targeted because of the algorithms that they have, because of the way that they can actually predict the data usage, data flows, and the like.
Is this a major step forward of decoupling? I actually don't think so. I think that when you look at, if you were to say, you're simply not going to allow trade, or you're going to force, there's a lot of discussion now, you're going to force a Chinese internet versus an English language internet. I really see those as false choices. I think we're just at one of those moments where for the first time you're starting to see apps, technologies come from overseas that are at a certain scale that the existing large providers in the US look at, whether it's a government saying this is a security threat, whether it's a company saying this is a business threat. And I think that we're dealing with some of this for the first time. So I expect a certain amount of awkwardness and a certain amount of tit for tat response on that. I am one of the folks who would say there's simply no way to decouple. At least in technology, there's really no way to distinguish Chinese AI from US AI, the underlying technologies, autonomous vehicles, et cetera. What you can do is you can restrict, going back to, it's all about the data. It's all about the access to data, management of data, and what you use the data for. That's where the real discussions need to be. The rest of it, I think, is a lot of noise at this point.